They abstained from alcohol, all alcohol, beer, wine, strong drink, any kind of alcohol, tobacco products, chew, snuff, cigarettes, cigars, and coffee and tea, and that is how they have interpreted hot drinks. When I was a kid, I remember countless of discussions about how Joseph was told by God the evils of the world that would come before they understood science, that nobody knew what caffeine was, nobody knew that smoking could hurt you, nobody knew that tea had that dastardly stuff called tannin in it. I remember as a kid learning this over and over about how this was evidence that Joseph was so inspired. I've come to see that issues related to health were actually a hot and growing topic in the early 19th century. Writer Lester E. Bush reported that, quote, "It is relevant to recall that from a few thousand advocates in the late 1820s, the American Temperance Society had grown to well over 1 million members by 1834. This was in the United States, which had not spread out west by a long shot. He also wrote, the leaders of the movement were most often clergymen. What people ate, drank, and how they cared for their body was a topic within the body of Christ before Joseph Smith was even born. In the century prior to Joseph Smith's revelation, John Wesley's Primitive Physic, a book, vigorously condemned all sorts of things that are found in the Word of Wisdom, including, quote, strong drink. According to Bush, Sylvester Graham, the guy who invented the graham cracker, and Dr. William Alcott crusaded strongly against stimulants like coffee, tea, and meats. You have to understand that everything at that time, because there really was no modern science, was considered a stimulant. And so they would kind of categorize these things, and this was too strong of a stimulant or not strong enough of a stimulant. Even alcohol was considered what they called a stimulant. When Joseph Smith was in Carthage jail before he was shot, they brought wine in, which they drank, and it says, quote, they drank it because their spirits were down and they wanted to revive themselves. All this stuff is centered around the idea of a stimulant, okay? If you became ill, it was because you had too much stimulant in you. Often food consumption was related to the time of season by these crusaders of health, which in my opinion made Joseph's revelation on the subject just another long list of plagiarisms. You know, he talked about the seasons and the fruit, and you read this in Doctrine and Covenants 89. This stuff was talked about forever. Where Joseph Smith said God told him flesh only in times of winter or cold or famine, and every herb in the season thereof, one Dr. Tickner wrote in his book, The Philosophy of Living at that time, quote, and not only is animal food proper in winter, and during the heat of summer, nature has given a variety of succulent vegetables and fruits. But the popular topics of the day that became revelations in Joseph's mind didn't end with meat and vegetables. Eliminating tea and coffee from the American diet was another health reformist cause at that time too, especially if these drinks were served hot. Speaking of hot coffee and tea, Andrew Combe in Physiology of Digestion, which was published in 1836, wrote, when made very strong or taken in large quantity, especially late in the evening, they not only ruin the stomach, but very seriously derange the health of the brain and nervous system. I recite these quotes so that you can hear for yourself that opinions on substances like alcohol, tobacco, coffee, tea, and meat were frequently the topic in Joseph Smith's day and age, and to show how his revelations were right on target with which the most vocal health advocates were claiming. Even John Wesley in the previous century warned that coffee and tea were, quote, extremely harmful to those with weak nerves. For centuries, tobacco, which was referred to as the weed, I had to laugh through it, was used for all sorts of concoctions and poultices. Researchers going back as far as 1633 were able to locate the Word of Wisdom notion that tobacco could be used as an herb for bruises. This was mentioned in the Word of Wisdom too. Just another example of good old Joseph taking current events around him and transforming them into convenient revelations from God. Now, admittedly, it was thought for some time that smoking tobacco would help cure things or protect you against things like the Black Plague. But by 1830, a strong anti-tobacco lobby had begun to take root, which was all part of the popular health reform movement that began in New England and spread all the way to Ohio, where Joseph lived for quite a while. This health reform movement was spearheaded by people like the aforementioned Sylvester Graham cracker guy, Ellen G. White of the Seventh-day Adventist fame, the Kellogg family, yes, the Tony the Tiger Kellogg guy, same family, and C.W. Post, the Grape Nut family people. These health reformers condemned before Joseph ever spoke it, alcohol, tobacco, tea, coffee, opium, and other stimulants, including meat, well before God told Joseph his opinion on the matter. In the book, The Burned Over District by Whitney R. Cross, which is a great read, by the way, he writes, quote, "The temperance movement was larger in every dimension than the burned over district ultraism. It began much earlier and has not yet ended. During the 1830s, it attained national scope. Further, if alcohol was evil because it frustrated the Lord's design on the human body, other drugs like tea, coffee, and tobacco must have been equally wrong. Josiah Bessel, the pioneer line ultraist, had even before 1831 revival got beyond temperance to the Cold Water Society and said no tea, coffee, or any other slops." That's from the Burned Over District, New York, 1965, page 211 through 212. So while the advice found in the Word of Wisdom may have some basis, why doesn't the LDS Church recite a true context of the revelation, quote-unquote revelation, that Joseph Smith said was so divinely inspired? Why don't they tell us that this was the condition of the nation at the time, instead of saying that he was the only one who knew that coffee or tea or alcohol or tobacco could be dangerous? The church history admits the setting pretty generally. In the preface to the Doctrine and Covenants, section 89, it states, "As a consequence of the early brethren using tobacco in their meetings, the prophet was led to ponder upon the matter. Consequently, he inquired of the Lord concerning it. This revelation, known as the Word of Wisdom, was the result." The first 3 verses were originally written as an inspired introduction and description by the prophet. Brigham Young, however, in Journal of Discourses, volume 12, page 158, adds a little more information to the queue when he said, quote, "I think I am as well acquainted with the circumstances which led to the giving of the Word of Wisdom as any man in the church." So humble, that Brigham, I tell you. "Although I was not present at the time to witness them. The first school of the prophets was held in a small room situated over the prophet's kitchen. When they assembled together in this room after breakfast, the first thing they did was light their pipes, and while smoking, talked about the great things of the kingdom, and spit all over the room. And as soon as the pipe was out of their mouths, a large chew of tobacco would then be taken. Often when the prophet entered the room to give the school instructions, he would find himself in a cloud of tobacco smoke. This and the complaints of his wife at having to clean so filthy a floor made the prophet think on the matter, and he inquired of the Lord relating to the conduct of the elders in using tobacco, and the revelation known as the Word of Wisdom was the result of this inquiry." Couldn't Joseph Smith just have asked the guys to not do that in the house? Did he have to say the Lord came up with this? Did he have to do that with everything? Interestingly, David Whitmer, who was one of the witnesses to the Book of Mormon, gave other insights to the revelation, and these insights were printed in the Des Moines Daily News on Saturday, October 16, 1886. Whitmer said Joseph's wife, Emma, said, "It would be a good thing if a revelation could be had declaring the use of tobacco a sin, and commanding its suppression. The matter was taken up and joked about between the brethren, suggesting that the revelation should also provide for that total abstinence from coffee and tea drinking, intended as a counter to dig back at the sisters. Sure enough, the subject was afterward taken up in dead earnest, and the Word of Wisdom was the result." Convenient revelations, which were often tied and even plagiarized from current events, are located throughout almost all, of Joseph Smith's work. From the Book of Mormon to much of the Doctrine and Covenants to Emanuel Swedenborg's view on the eternality of matter, pre-existent life, all of this stuff borrowed, plagiarized, regurgitated, thrown back out as thus saith the Lord. Next week, we'll continue to examine how committed Joseph Smith himself was to this convenient revelation he came up with.